Oh yeah. Okay. Saya ya karena ada bang. Oh, email aja kali ya kirim. We have a WhatsApp or email. Yeah, because we are hybrid, so you could join the Zoom one. Oh yeah, yeah. Yung where to do mga computer. Your email address, your email address onto WhatsApp. And the link, the Zoom link. Oh, the Zoom link. Do you have it in your calendar? I do, but I don't have internet. Okay. Oh. Have the yeah, yeah, just give me the name of my name. Yep. 44 844 double two. Uh, Okay, got it. Start. What is here? Oh, yeah. So, uh, 20. Yeah, so I'll leave it up for now. So, so, 20. Oh, okay, now.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you are all doing well. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Sonia from Communication, and it's pleasure to welcome each of you to today's Power Talk. Today, we are going to have a truly insightful session on rapid sensory profiling, an industry suitable approach by Professor Jin Gilim, PhD, and Associate Professor in Sensory and Consumer Science at CAS Food Research Center. Guiding us through this discussion is our esteemed moderator, Ms. Siti Muslimatun, the head of Food Science and Nutrition at i3L. But before we jump into the discussion, I'd like to inform everyone here that towards the end of this session, there will be an evaluation form to be filled out for claiming e-certificates. Okay, without further ado, let's extend a warm welcome to Ms. Siti and Professor Lim.
All righty, good. Does that work? Yeah, it works. Okay. I've just been told that I've got 2 hours, which I did not prepare for. But it actually gives me a little bit of opportunity to take it easy and really going through some basics of sensory science. First of all, thanks, Sidi, for inviting me. It is very special. I have to say that for different reasons. I've never been to Jakarta. I've never been to Indonesia. Yet my parents are from Indonesia. My mom grew up in Jakarta, only 5 kilometers from the hotel where I'm staying at, actually. And my dad is from Medan. But again, I never visited Indonesia. As you can see, I'm clearly Dutch. So I'm actually from the Netherlands. Did my education in partly at the Wageningen University, so also where Siti did her PhD, and a lot of other people did their PhD. So that's a well-known agricultural university in the Netherlands. And I moved on to receiving more education in the United States. So I lived in the United States for a couple of years at the Monell Chemical Center. And the Monell Chemical Center is a center that is completely dedicated to taste and smell. Tell you a little bit more about that once we get along the presentation. After that, I moved back to the Netherlands, did another 2 years of my PhD, and joined Unilever back in Vlaardingen. And there is a strong connection between Unilever and Indonesia. They not only sell products here, but they also do a lot of research in Indonesia. And then after that, I decided to move my whole family to Australia, which happened about 16 years ago. So that's quite a long time ago. And so I'm a little bit of a mixed bag. So I'm Dutch, yet a little bit Indonesian, maybe a little bit American, and a little bit of Australian. So if you don't understand me, that's just because of that. If you can't pick my accent, that's just because of that, because it's a bit of a mixed bag of everything. Hopefully you're not following me with the camera, because I tend to walk around a lot. Is that okay? Yeah. Okay. So so actually my specialty is really into the psychology of food choice. Why do people eat the foods they do? And also into sensory science, but more from the biological point of view. So how does taste develop? And I think that you all have done your course in sensory science. Is that right? So you all are familiar with sensory science? Yeah. If you don't, you're in trouble probably. They're all your students, right? Yeah. Oh yeah. So you and Yunda. So if you've never seen those, your two professors, then you're in trouble. Um, so so what I've been told is that you already know quite a lot about uh, quality descriptive analysis, right? That's right. Right. So your the use of panels and the use of consumers. So some of the things that I'm going to tell you might be a little bit of repetition of what you've heard before, and some of them are quite new. So what I'm going to mainly focus on are rapid sensory methodologies. So those are the sensory methodologies that, although people sometimes call them novel methodologies, they're not that novel actually. They've been around for 20 odd years. And they actually come from, a lot of that comes from projective techniques from psychology. And that's been around for a very long time. You may know the technique where they have like an ink blot and they say, what do you see in this particular picture? Not sure if you've ever seen that one. That is sort of a projective technique. And they've used that for sensory science for different reasons. All right, so hopefully that works. Does that work? It should work. Oh, that doesn't work. Doesn't matter. That work? Oh, that doesn't work. Why can't I change my slide? Oh, and now it works. Ah, okay, now it works. Yeah, all right, all good. Okay. Okay, so these are just the learning objectives of today. I want you to get a really sort of a critical view on the importance of taste, the importance of taste as a driver of food consumption, but also as a barrier of food consumption. When you are in a particular field of science, you tend to think that that's the most important thing that there is, right? It also sort of justifies your career, it justifies what you do. Because if it's not important, what are you doing, right? But it is important to take a step back and really think about, okay, so how important is it really? And of course, it's true that we do eat the foods we like, but then at the same time, we not always eat the food that we like the most, right? So think about what you had for breakfast. So who wants to share what they had for breakfast? Anybody? I always go to the front row. So if you're in the front row, you're right. So what do you have for breakfast? With what? Oh, that's not a lot. Anybody else that have something for breakfast? Let's go to the back row because you think you're safe, but you're not. What do you have for breakfast? Yeah. Okay, was it the best food you ever had? Yeah, really? A lot of people would say no, actually. A lot of people would say, I had this for breakfast, but it is not the best food. It's just something that was available. It's something that's quick. It's something that I have every day, right? So if I ask you the question, what do you have for breakfast? People say, it's something that's easy. I always have, when you're in Australia, you have wheat bix. When you're in the Netherlands, you have sandwiches. They always eat sandwiches anyway. I think you notice that. And maybe here you have particular congee or whatever, something that you always have for breakfast. Then if I say, okay, so what do you have for a Saturday meal with friends, right? That's where it becomes completely different, because all of a sudden you go for food that might not be the healthiest, but are very tasty. and then maybe it could be a little bit more expensive if it's a very special occasion. So you can already see that depending on the day and depending on your motives, that you not always go for your most preferred food. And that then brings in question about how important is taste. And I want you to get a really sort of critical view on that. I'm not saying that taste is not important. I'm just saying that you have to rethink that a little bit about how important taste is. The other thing that I want to go through is the difference between sensation and perception. And who's heard about sensation and perception? If half of the class says, yes, I know what it is, then I'm not going to go over it. No? Nobody? Who's ever heard of sensation and perception? Not sure what it is in Bahasa, but no. No, there's no. The sensation and perception, known concept. What's that? Yes, so sensation and perception is of course the English term, but I'm not sure what it is in Bahasa. Sensation and perception. Yeah, okay. So in psychology, it's a big thing. The difference between sensation and perception, and I want you to get a good sort of understanding of what that is. And then after that, we're going to go a little bit more into the content of difference between descriptive analysis and consumer research. A lot of that you probably know, but it doesn't hurt to hear it again, or maybe from another sort of perspective. Then we're going to go to our rapid sensory method. I want you to basically sort of in simple terms explain what it is after this lecture. I'm not here to give you all the ins and outs of every single rapid methodology. That wouldn't be possible, because for every single methodology there are books written about it, right? And that's really not the point. I can show you how you can analyze all these kind of things, but a lot of things are so complicated that even people who are working in that area don't completely understand it. But it's important to know the principle of it. So it's important that if you going into a job, you know, in a couple of years' time, and let's say you work for a company and they are suggesting a particular sensory methodology, that you can say, hey, what about this particular rapid sensory methodology? That might be useful. So it's not about knowing the ins and outs. It's just knowing that it's there, knowing what you can use it for, knowing how quick it is, and knowing what the advantages and disadvantages are of those sensory methods. So that's the whole point. So when I ramble on different sort of technicalities, just basically forget about that and try to get the big picture, try to understand what the big picture of that method is. I also want you to know not only what it is, but also why it would suit the food industry. And as I said, I've worked for the food industry for a couple of years, and I now work in academia. So I know quite well the difference in needs, the difference in capabilities, and the difference in knowledge, and what drives a company and what drives academia. That can be quite different. And then we're going to go over a couple of rapid methodologies. So there are a lot more rapid methodologies than I show you here. These are a couple of well-knowns. So one is flash profiling, the other one is napping, CARA, so check all that apply, and penalty analysis. The penalty analysis is something that you can very easily apply in your own research. That is actually relatively easy to analyze. So I'll go through that in a little bit more detail. Okay. Okay, so importance of taste. So have a look at this one. So you've got your drivers and you have your barriers. Nothing in this slide should be completely a surprise to you. So for everything you can think about something, right? So you can think about, okay, some people eat food because it's better for the environment. Others will eat food because it's convenient, better for health, it gives them energy, it's accessible, right? So you can all think about these things, and of course there's enjoyment. But again, you won't always eat the things that you enjoy the best, the most. What is true though, is that mostly people eat food for something that gives them a immediate benefit. Often that is taste, but it could also be convenience. when you talk about an immediate benefit, when you look at better for the environment, it becomes now more and more important, right? So the younger generations like you are seeing that it is actually very important for them. But the older generation thought, the environment is not, it's important, but it's something that happens in 400 years or whatever, right? So they can see the importance of it, but it doesn't make them change their food choice or their choice what they do in terms of cars, in terms of, where they go on holiday or whether they eat, drink bottled water, etc. Right? So my point is that it becomes an important driver if it's important for you, and it's important now. So not like in 40 years, it's important now, right? So keep that in mind. So when you look at the barriers, you have bad flavor, your lack of skills to make a meal. I once went to the United States with my students, and what really became apparent is that in the United States, in that particular university in Penn State, the students weren't able to cook. They couldn't cook a lot of them couldn't cook their own meals, simply because they were on sort of meal plans and had access to restaurants and buffet food, and so they didn't have to cook their own meal. So they didn't master the skill of cooking, and once they got a job, they got really busy. So again, they just went out for takeout food, and then they got children, and they didn't teach their children to cook, etc., etc., etc. So that's generations in the making that people cannot make their own meal. And the United States is not the only country where that sort of happens. But okay, so lack of skills, lack of knowledge, expensive ethical concerns, time, lack of access. All very known things, right? When you think about sensory and when you think about taste, these things become important. So one is enjoyment, and the other one is bad flavor, right? So if I ask you, who is always eating the same question, who's always eating the food that they like the best? Like in any situation, you would eat the food you like the best. Who would do that? Now you wouldn't, right? Because there's enough instances where you say, okay, I'm not going to go for my durian. I'm not going to go for my croquette, or just pick something Dutch, or any food, right? But because maybe I just don't have the money for it. Maybe I don't consider it healthy, etc. Right? So you wouldn't do that. Now the next question is, who would eat a food that has a really bad flavor? Who would do that? You would you would do it for your health, right? But there's a limit to it, right? So there's a limit to what you're happy to sacrifice. Point being that in sensory, actually the bad flavor and your rejection is a better predictor of intake than your preference. Simply because a bad flavor is very hard to overcome. If something is in the acceptable range, you're happy to take this something that's acceptable, I don't know, a 7, over something that's acceptable for a 9, if that one is a lot more cheaper or more convenient, right? But if something is a 3 on the acceptability level of a 10, right, or scale of 10, you wouldn't, most people wouldn't consume it, right? So that's what you got to keep in mind when you're doing sensory research. I showed this yesterday as well, but I think it is an important one. So this is the Maslow hierarchy of needs. You might be familiar with it. It's a concept that developed many years ago by Maslow. And basically what he said is that when we look at human mankind and how they survive, what's the first thing that you need to survive? Who can name anything? Right? What's the first thing that you need? What? Water. You need water, right? Because without water in 3 days, your history, right? So all these things like breathing, food, water, shelter, clothes, you need your sleep. That's the first thing that you need to cover. Once you've covered that, then you can think about, okay, employment, property, family, so safety and security, and then it goes to love and belonging. And a lot more up the scale are more sort of the higher order needs, right? Ethical concerns, your morals, right? You can talk about ethics and morals, but if you don't have enough food to survive, that becomes not that important anymore, right? Well, you see a particular animal and you say, it's quite unethical or immoral to eat that animal, but yet when you're hungry, you're like, yeah, okay, it's really, yeah, it's unethical, but that animal's history, right? So you can see that there's a hierarchy. So when you think about food, there's also a hierarchy. The basic level is that there needs to be enough food. Then it needs to be acceptable. Again, that's where sensory comes in, right? So you don't want to eat rotten food. Then it needs to be reliable, good taste, and novel, and then the instrumental function of food, whether it is, it protects you against something that happens in 40 years time or whatever. But you can see that good taste and acceptability are acceptability even more, so that links to rejection. So those two are all sensory. So that's where sensory sits in, and that's important to keep in mind. If you're running sensory panels, keep that in mind. How important is it? And it links to the need for rapid sensory methods. So sensory science, just in short, this is the definition of the IFSD. Sensory science is a scientific discipline used to evoke, measure, analyze, make the interpretation of those responses to products that are perceived by the 5 main senses. So that is basically a definition of sensory. So it looks at responses, human responses, and it looks at the interpretation of those human responses. Keep that in mind, because I'm going to talk about sensation and perception, and then I'm going to talk about what we actually do with sensory panels. Okay, sensation and perception. On the left-hand side, we have sensation. On the right-hand side, we have perception. Sensation is basically what happens on the receptor level. So every time I eat a food, there's a taste receptor that responds to it, and it sends a signal to my brain where it gets more or less translated. So your sensation is basically the raw input. Sensation, you can measure that on a neurological level, and in a way you can measure sensation with other instrumentation. You can use just your chemical analysis to see how much sugar is in it and how sweet that could be. You can look at the intensity of color, right? You can measure that with looking at it. You can also measure that with a machine that measures color, right? So that's your sensation. Perception is, however, different. So perception is really that interpretation that you make. Your human brain is making an interpretation of whatever you perceive, right? So when you perceive something sweet, you translate that into, oh, that's sweet, I like it, and I want to eat it. So I like it, that's already a perception. You see from a visual point of view, you see a particular painting. From a sensation point of view, that's just a combination of different colors. From a perception point of view, you say, oh, that's a Van Gogh, and it's a beautiful painting, and it reminds me of whatever, right? So that's the difference between sensation and perception. That's more the consumer, right? So the consumer is not thinking, is not over-analyzing the food. Often when you ask people about what do you think, well, can you tell me what the food was and what do you think of the food? A normal consumer is not going to say, well, this was a sweetness of 4 and it was a bitterness of blah, but no. A normal consumer is going to say, yeah, I like it. Or it's going to say, yeah, this crispiness is really doing this to my body or whatever, right? So it becomes a story that you tell, and that's your perception. And that brings me down to your analytical and your hedonic approach to sensory science. So when you are looking at the hedonic response, you have people who are more or less normal. They respond in a normal way. And traditionally, people said, okay, that's all fine, but those consumers cannot do the analytical work. They can't give a precise description of the flavor. So they can't give me a precise flavor profile. Therefore, we need to train consumers. We need to select the consumers. We need to make sure that they are the best tasters, smellers in that we can find, right? And that's where your trained sensory paneling comes in. The idea that consumers are not precise enough, they can't verbalize what they're tasting, because some people will call it a silver flavored, other people will say it's a rotten egg flavor, other will say something else, right? So it's very hard to understand what they actually perceive. So you need to train them. You need to say, this is the particular flavor that we're looking for, smell it, identify it, and being able to identify that particular flavor in different products. Now I'm going to give you a product. Tell me reliably how much of that particular flavor is in this product. That's your sensory paneling. You want to make sure that the whole panel has the same understanding of that flavor, what it is. So that's why we use references, right? We either use references to say, well, this particular compound is the compound that we're looking for. We have developed a product and we're really afraid that this particular compound is present, and we know that particular compound is causing an off flavor. We want to know how much of that compound can be perceived, and that's where you do your sensory paneling. Traditionally, the sensory panel is not going to say anything about whether they like it or not. They're just going to say how much is in it. So in that way, the sensory panel is basically like a robot, right? But robots don't eat food, so they stay away from the hedonic side, right? So that is, in short, your sensory paneling. So when you look at this, and again, this is sort of conceptual framework. So what you see here is going from the middle to people. Oh, it doesn't matter. So when you go from the middle of this figure to the outside, it goes from very controlled to not controlled at all. You can see three axes. One is the type of stimuli, one is the type of respondent, and the other one is the measurement procedure. So when you want to measure something that is very controlled, you are going to use expert judges. You're going to use very precise scales that are validated, and you're going to use pure substances. So you're not going to use foods. You're going to use sugar solutions, salt solutions, all those kind of things. And that's a very precise measurement, right? But as you can imagine, that in the middle circle is not really what happens in the outside world. Nobody's going to go, except for sensory scientists, going to a store with their ballot and saying, you know, I'm going to judge the food on sweetness or whatever. You're not going to do that if you're normal. You basically do other things. So the more you go into the outside of this figure, you'll see that you get more real. You test it with real foods, real random consumers, and you are looking at consumption. You're going to look at behavior. So the more on the outside of this figure you are, the more real it is. The more what we call ecologically valid it is. But also, the less control you have. So in sensory science, we often trying to work with this balance. Do we want to have a lot of control and a lot of precise, very precise measurements with well-trained panel members, or we're going to go the other side? We're going to go to real consumers, and we're going to look at real products. It's a difficult decision simply because a company sells real products to real consumers. Yet, classic sensory science says, oh, no, but those real consumers and real products, it's nice, but it's too confusing. We can't make sense out of it. And that's why we're going to use the expert judges. But you can see the problem, right? How predictable is that? So when you look at the classic sort of how you make a descriptive analysis, again, you are within this inner circle, expert judges. You're going to use, sometimes you use real foods, but you can also spike the foods to make sure that the panel is well trained. They do that, for example, with wine. You've got different wines, and you know that there's a particular off flavor in wine because of, for example, the bushfires. You can taint the wine with a particular compound to see if people can pick it up. this is a real, this is actually a real story. So in Australia, as well as in other parts of the world, there have been a lot of bushfires. The bushfires impact the grape, and the grape, that's where the wine is made of, right? So if the grape is grown in an area where there's a lot of bushfires, a lot of smoke, the wine gets tainted and people can taste it, and you can basically throw out your whole batch of wine. You want to know, how can you measure that? How can you detect it early on? And that's where an expert panel can be actually quite useful. Okay, so descriptive analysis. You want to provide a profile of the sensory attributes. You've got qualitative and quantitative attributes. And the main point of this is that you use a trained panel with expert judges. It's good, it's precise, it is the gold standard, but it takes an awful lot of time to train a panel. It can take up to 200 hours to train a panel. It's extremely expensive, it's time consuming, and that's exactly not what a lot of companies want. They don't have time, they don't have money, they don't have the patience, and sometimes they don't have the expertise, right? So that's a very hard sell to companies. Traditionally, the large companies like Unilever and Nestle had trained sensory panels. It becomes less and less. Those trained sensory panels are less and less common. We have a trained sensory panel where I work. And a lot of companies say, okay, we use your trained sensory panel. The problem with that is that a trained sensory panel needs to be trained on the commodity. You can't use a trained sensory panel that's used on dairy and use it for olive oil, because olive oil's got different compounds in there, and it's all about recognizing those compounds. Okay, so the common objective of a descriptive analysis is, for example, you want to compare products to existing products. Okay, that's good. You want to know how good your product is, where it sits in the market. You want to improve and optimize the products. You want to link it to hedonics. You don't want the descriptive analysis to do any hedonic work, but you can combine that data with consumer data, and you can do what we call preference mapping. I'm not sure. Did you go through preference mapping? Did you explain preference mapping to your students, or? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So you've got your QDA, and then your preference mapping is basically. Okay. So preference mapping is basically, put it very simply, you do your consumer research, then you combine it with your QDA, and by combining that, you can see which particular compounds are driving that liking. Right? So that's, in very simple terms, that's what preference mapping is. You want to get insights into formulation, process, sensory properties, and you can use this as a communication tool. One of the things that, for example, just giving a real example, when I was working for a company, a particular fast food producer that sells chicken, they had particular seasoning in that chicken, and they wanted to go to a different supplier of that seasoning. One of the things that they want to make sure is that that new mix of seasoning would be the same sensorily as the old mix. So that's where they used a trained sensory panel to make sure that that mix was the same. So that's quite important for a company. Okay, so again, so when you look at the industry, questions: can I replace an ingredient? I want to know whether my measurement is precise or not. I want to quantify predetermined attribute, meaning that I want to know how much, I have a sample that's a rancid sample. I want to know how much rancidity is in the other samples. So you could do sensory paneling for that. Shelf life testing is an important one. We know that when you keep products on the shelf, they change the sensory profile. We want to know how quickly that is going to change and what is actually impacting that. So light can have a big impact on shelf life. So that's the reason why beer is sold in a particular colored bottle, same as olive oil. So you've been through this, flavor profiling, QDA, spectrum. So these are the well-known descriptive analysis. For some of those methods, you use a reference sample. So you say, I've got this reference sample. I'm going to train them on this reference sample, on this particular sensory profile. And I want to know whether that's actually present in the other products, right? Fair enough. For some of them, for some of those, the panel will generate their own attributes. For others, the attributes are given. But what is similar in all these things, and all these methods, is that they're trained panels. Time, money, extremely precise, but the golden standard. Look at the industry needs. Companies are now living in an environment where they basically can develop a new product in months' time, right? They can be extremely quick to develop a new product. So you don't have time to go through precise descriptive analysis. You don't have the time, you don't have the money, and sometimes that precision is not even needed, right? You can do very precise. You can be very precise, but if there's so many other things in the mix that basically doesn't make it necessary to have that high precision. So that's where your rapid methodologies come in. I don't know what that screening yellow thing is. And is that me or is that the? Oh, okay. So that's all the people online. Don't stop scribbling on your screen. Is that? I don't dislike it, but no, actually I do. What's that? No. I gotta be. I did make some of those slides in the plane, but I haven't done that. Anyway, it doesn't matter. You can still read it, right? Okay. So so you want to have a quick response. You want to have a method that is flexible, and maybe most of all, you want to be closer to the consumer. So is there a way to be closer to the consumers without making use of highly trained panels? Again, it comes back to my previous slide where I said in that middle part of the picture, it becomes very precise, but also very unreal. If you work with consumers, it becomes a little bit more real, but the downside is that consumers are not trained, don't give you that precise data. But is there a way around it? And that's where your rapid methods come in. So I'm going to go through a couple of methodologies. So basically there are, it says 3, but there are 4 classes of rapid methodologies. One is the you've verbal description methodologies. So we're talking about flash profiling and CADA. I'm going to talk about that today. There is a method that is very much focused on similarity and differences between products. That is napping. There is the polarized sensory positioning. That's working with references and comparing the products to set references or polls. I'm not going to discuss that. And there are dynamic methods. One of that is, for example, the temporal dominance of sensation. And that's a method which I'm not going to explain in too much depth. But basically what it is, it's when you consuming a product, you give it a rating of how sweet, sour, and whatever it is. But while you're consuming it, that sensory profile will change. For those of you who drink wine, you may know that, I don't drink wine, by the way, but you may know that if you drink it, then the sensory profile will change along that consumption. You're the same with chocolate. The chocolate melts, and when the chocolate melts, you get a different sensory profile. That dynamic method is basically measuring that difference. So it can measure that the sweetness is, 4 at the start, and in the middle it goes up of your consumption head, and just before you swallow it goes down. Those are the, yep. It's similar to the time intensity measurement. Yep. So similar to time intensity measurement, but again, it's not a quick method. It's quite a labor-intensive method. Okay, so flash profiling, napping, CADA, and penalty analysis. Those are the 4 methods that I'm gonna explain a little bit more in more depth. And again, it's not about you knowing exactly how to analyze this data. It's about you knowing that that method is out there, you've got a rough understanding of when you want to use it, you've got a rough understanding of how many samples you can use, a rough understanding of how many participants you need. Okay, so flash profiling. This is often used with experienced subjects, so it's not completely naive consumers. These are, for example, people that, when you talk about chocolate, maybe people that say work in the company and work a lot with chocolate, so they have some basic understanding of chocolate. They're not trained, but they've got some basic understanding. What they do in this flash profiling system is that they select their own attributes. So basically, what it is, they'll be giving a range of different products. So let's say 5 different, 6 different, 11 different chocolates, and they're being asked, okay, so what could you rate these chocolates on? Give me some attributes. And people say, okay, I think sweetness is in one, how I could distinguish these different chocolates. Other people say, oh, I think it's the color, etc. Right? So they generate their own attributes. And then for each one of those attributes, they're going to put all the chocolates in a ranked order. So they don't give it a rating, they give it a ranked order. Okay? So basically, this is what it looks like. So you've got all your chocolates here. For example, this particular person said, well, melting is an important attribute. And then they have to put place the products on least melting properties to the highest melting properties. Now you can see there's no number on it. It's just a rank order, right? But it's a relative, so that it's how it's relative on this continuous scale. So with that methodology, you can get a sense of how similar and how different products are. You can also get a sense of what the important attributes are that people rated on. The downside is a little bit that people may come up with different attributes. So you have to look at those attributes and say, okay, this is probably meaning the same thing, right? So if somebody says acidity, the other one says sourness. No, it's not exactly the same, but it's sort of similar. But it does give you a good idea of how different the products are on particular attributes. So the good thing is it doesn't need excessive training, and you can look at the most relevant attributes and how the different products rate on those attributes. The disadvantage, the interpretation of the sensory dimensions can be a little bit difficult. Again, that's because they generate their own sensory attributes. You cannot use heavily trained people, panelists for this, because heavily trained panelists are too trained to use this particular method and are maybe overthinking it. It doesn't give you a list of all the attributes. It just gives you a list of the most obvious ones, because we will ask them, generate 3 attributes that just come to mind. And of course, they're not going to say something that is not top of mind for them. So that's flash profiling. So again, flash profiling, say 11 products, ask the consumer, how would you rate these, and what attributes would you rate these 11 different chocolates? They give you a list of attributes, and for each single attribute, you're going to ask the participant to rate the products on that particular attribute. Okay? So that's one method. Napping is another method. Napping, it actually comes from the French word napper, which is a serviette, and it's a way to look at the similarity of products on a 2-dimensional scale. So basically, what it is you have a piece of paper, which is not a complete square. It's 40 by 60. So one axis is larger than the other. You've got all the different products on that piece of paper, and you say, okay, now put all the products that you think are similar to one another closer together, and the products that are further away from each other, put them further away on that sheet. So you get a visual representation of your products. Right? So, and I'll show you an example of what it would look like. This is just a procedure that you're going to go through. So you present all the samples at the same time. So it can be 11 samples or more, but it can't be like 90 samples, because wouldn't fit in a piece of paper. It needs to fit in a piece of paper. You taste all the samples, you write down a couple of attributes, and then you arrange the products visually. So even if you don't give it any attributes, you can still put them together, right? So you can do it with people that don't speak the same language, right? They can still put it together on that piece of paper, and then you can ask them to to circle the ones that are close together, and you can ask the consumer to then use ultra flash profiling, which basically means that they're gonna give it so what attributes are important for this particular group. So this is just an example. So I've got these different products, right? So you can see that this axis here, the x-axis is longer than the y-axis. You can also see that these different products, they've been grouped on different attributes. So for this particular consumer, as you can see, is that these are more sort of the pointy stimuli. These are with the round edges. So apparently that was the most important one, because the most important attribute is going to be rated on the longest axis. That's just from psychology point of view. People use the longest axis to rate their most important attribute, and then the other attribute is obviously color, right? So in that way, you can give a quick way of saying, you know, these are similar, these are different, and these are the reasons for why they are different or similar. So there's different ways you can use napping. So there's global napping, partial napping, ultra flash profiling. That's just giving it a name, and you can do sorting. And basically, it comes down to the instruction that you provide to your consumers. So for your global mapping, you basically give all the products, and you say you're free to evaluate the samples according to any criteria that you choose, and you do not need to specify your criteria. For partially napping, you basically say you got to evaluate the samples on, and you give them a particular attribute. So if you know as a company, I'm very interested in melting properties because I'm making chocolate, and melting is extremely important for chocolate. It's not only because it's nice in your mouth, but it also is important for flavor release. That's one of the reasons why it's so difficult to make butter, to make it the same as butter, because butter has a particular melting property that gives rise to particular flavor release, and that's very difficult to mimic. So that's partial napping. And then napping with ultra flash profiling is basically asking the people to give attributes to all the products that are together, and then you say rate that on a 10-point intensity scale. So you get a little bit more information. But as you can see, you don't need trained sensory panels for this. You don't need to have predetermined attributes. You don't need a lot of time. Yet you get a reasonable, good idea of where your product sits in the space. So it's quite cost effective. It gives you a good perceptual map, and it's actually quite similar to the results that they get from descriptive analysis. But of course, the products need to be different enough for them to distinguish them. You can't have a slight difference in sugar concentration. Napping is not going to work for that. The other downside is that it's only going to separate it on 2 different dimensions. You can do multiple nappings. You can give them, you say, okay, I've got this tablecloth, rank it now. Okay, so this is the ranking. Now do it again, and do it again, and do it again, right? So you get different ratings and different ways different ways they score it. Okay. CADA. So CADA, you're probably familiar with CADA, so check all that apply. So basically what it is, it's a very simple method as a participant, because you say, okay, I'll have all these different attributes, so that's sweet, smooth, thick, acidity, and you just taste the sample and say which one applies, and you tick, 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 right? And the idea is that the more people tick a particular attribute, the more important that is. You don't get a direct score, but apparently that is more important. There's also something that's called RADA, so that's rate everything that you have checked. So basically, it says, okay, you've ticked sweet for this particular example. How sweet is it, right? So that gives you a little bit more. So as a consumer, it seems to be quite simple. You can do it with quite a lot of terms, 10 to 40, 1 to 12 samples. Now, not too many consumers, 60 to 80. You don't have to use a trained panel. It was originally introduced with a trained panel, but you don't need them because it's quite easy. So it sounds too good to be true. And maybe in partly that is because coming up with these terms is not easy. You want to have terms that everyone has a similar understanding of what that is. If you say crispy, right? Crispy can mean crispy. It can mean brittle. It can mean any other textural property that people consider crispy, right? If there's a confusion about that, then the CADA is going to give you confusing data. So that's one of the difficulties that it has. The other one that it has is I wanted to go to another one. Where is it? Oh, here. Okay, I want to go to this one. Okay, so the other one is that consumers are often lazy and want to take the easy way out, right? So they're going to focus on the things that are very easy to process. This is eye tracking data, and basically the red is where people focus on, right? And they focus on the first words, and all the other ones they skip. Oh, there's a new column. Oh, I'm going to focus again. And so these words are not going to be ticked, not simply because it's not present, but simply because they don't pay attention to it. So you either want to randomize all that, or you got to take into account that that is an obvious bias when you are conducting your CADA. Alrighty? So we've now gone through fresh profiling, going to go through napping, CADA, very simple method, but it gives you a good indication of where your product sits. So penalty analysis is the one that I want to spend a little bit more time on, not too much. Not sure how long I've spoken to, probably too long. I'm still good? Yeah, still okay? Okay, good. Okay, okay, so penalty analysis. Traditionally, we said we have a 9-point hedonic scale, right? And we have an intensity scale. Penalty analysis is combining the two, and it can be quite nice because sometimes you like a particular product, right? Some people like it as number, say 9, other people like it as number 8. But why are you giving that a 8, or why do you give it a 9? When you think about rice, is it because you give it a, say, a 5 because you think it's not fluffy enough, right? Maybe it was too hard. Maybe it was not sweet enough, or maybe it didn't have enough popcorn flavor. Yes, rice does have popcorn flavor. This is a well-known chemical that's in the rice and develops. And that's a driver of liking. Maybe the color wasn't right. But when you look at the overall liking score, you don't know that. You don't know what is causing it, right? And that's what penalty analysis does. So penalty analysis is asking you the overall judgment of a product, and then it's asking particular attributes, and is asking you to rate it on a just about right scale. So just about right scale, I think I've got an do I have an example of that? Yeah, okay, so just about right scale is basically, okay, so you have a particular attribute, say softness of rice. If you say, yeah, the softness was just about right, you score it here. If you say it's not soft enough, you score it here. If you say it's too soft, you score it there, right? So that's what, so that's what, and that's what the consumer needs to do. So when you have that data, what you can do with it is actually quite nice and quite simple in essence. So your first step is you group all your respondents for a particular attribute in too little, just about right, or too much. So if you have softness, you look at all the consumers that said it's too soft, you put them in one group. All the consumers that said it's just about right, you put it in another group. And all the consumers said, oh, it's too soft, you put them in a third group. Then you're going to calculate what percentage of people are in each group. There might be 5% who say, yo, it's too soft. There might be 65% who say, yeah, that's exactly right. And the remainder of the participants will say, you know, the softness is too much, right? Then you want to, for each one of those groups, you want to calculate the mean liking. So if you have the 5% of the people who say it's not soft enough, okay, for all those people, how much did they like the rice? And you do exactly the same for all the other groups. And the penalty is basically calculated by the average of the liking of the just about right minus the average liking of too little in this case. So you are calculating how much the fact that the rice is too soft, how much that impact your overall liking. Okay, so just an example here. So we had say 5% that said it's not it's not soft enough. 65 said it's exactly right, and 30% said it's too soft, right? So again, you've got your three groups here. Let's say they give it a liking score of 6, they give it a liking score of 7, and they give it a liking score of 3. You can see that from just looking at it, you can see that if the rice is too soft, that impacts liking a lot more than when it's not soft enough. So that already tells you something. You can then calculate the penalty by looking at the liking for the just about right minus the liking for this particular group, so 6. So the penalty is 1. And you can do the same thing for here. The average liking of just about right minus your liking for this particular group is a 4. What you then can do, you can put it in a graph, and the graph basically shows you the percentage of consumers on this axis here and the penalty on this axis, right? So not soft enough, only 5%, low penalty. If it's too soft, 30% is impacted, and it's got a large penalty. So basically, what it tells you is that you want to focus on the things that having a large drop in liking and also represent a large group of consumers. Because if, say, this 5% that has a huge impact on liking, but it's only 5%, you can wonder whether that's important for you, right? It could be 1% and it can have a huge impact, but yeah, do you really care about that 1% of consumers? Maybe not, right? You know, yes, if you've got enough time, you care about it, but otherwise you don't. So this is data from one of my students, looked at rice, looked at brown rice and white rice. So I'm not sure if you can read it. So this was brown rice and white rice. So what you can see is the blue lines are too little and the red is too much. Again, the number of consumers who say it. So focus on the consumers here and focus on the penalty. So what we see is that the rum was too intense, it was too sticky, not fluffy enough, too hard, too much color. On this side, we'll see it's a different profile, too sticky, the rum intensity was a little bit too high, but not as high as here. The hardness was judged as not hard enough by only 30% of the consumers, but the penalty was not large. So when you look at these two graphs, which one do you think is the brown rice and which one do you think is the white rice? So which one is the brown rice? Is it A or B? Who says it's A? Who says the brown rice is A? Okay, so everyone thinks that this is the brown rice. Okay, try it again. Who thinks that this is the brown rice? That's the brown rice. No, okay, so this is the brown rice, and how you can tell it because color and hardness. So hardness, brown rice is you know it's hard, right? Often the aroma is a little bit more intense, but it doesn't matter. What I really wanted to show you is that if you have different products, you want to have it see what the different sensory profile is. You can use this method. You don't need a very precise descriptive analysis if you're just interested in the global sort of sensory profile of the two or how much they differ, right? So this was just done with untrained consumers. So hopefully you now have a little bit of a better sort of understanding of how important taste is or how important not is. You're able to know the difference in sensation and perception. Know the difference between your descriptive analysis and your consumer research. Is something that you probably already knew before this lecture. And you should be able to know what rapid sensory methods are, why they are important, and why food industry is so interested in the rapid methods. And you should be able to explain in very simple terms what the flash profiling, napping, kata, and penalty analysis are. So when you are in your job in the not too distant future, and you are talking to product development, and product development is saying, you know, I don't want to spend time, I don't want to spend money on descriptive analysis. Let's just do a team meeting and ask them, you know, what do you think about it? You think and say, you can do that, but that's not very precise. I've got another methodology that is not expensive, can be done with the team, can be done quickly, is not expensive, but gives you a lot better data than just asking what do you think about it. And that's where you come up with these rapid methodologies. And before you know it, you're promoted in the company and you're on your way with your career, hopefully. Alrighty, so that's all that I wanted to discuss. I'm not sure how long did it take? Too long? Okay, good. Any questions? Everyone fell asleep.
Okay, thank you very much, Lynn, for the. So actually, I learned a lot today. Any question? Or too confusing? Yes, Panan.
Yep. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, very good question. And that's exactly the problem that we have all the time. So treating a consumer group as one consumer group is almost wrong to begin with. Because as you said, right, in Indonesia, you've got so many different, you know, different groups of people. And you go to Singapore, extremely small nations, but you know, you have your Chinese, your Malay, your Indian, and they're really different from one another, right? You know, in the Netherlands, the same thing. You've got the good and the bad. So it's really different. So you then need to look at consumer segmentation, right? So you then need to say, okay, so who comes from Java, who comes from Sumatra, who comes from whatever region in Indonesia, right? And see if they differ. But it's actually also the strength of the penalty analysis. Because you can show that, hey, when I take people from this part of Jakarta and I compare it to people from Medan or wherever, right? You can actually see that, hey, see, softness is extremely important for people in Jakarta, but not really for Java. So that is actually a very good story. Because often companies, for good reasons, make one product, right? But sometimes they just have to diverse it a little bit. So that's a good question. And that's good to hear that you've been in marketing.
Yeah, because if talking about rice, if I'm not mistaken, for us, for Japanese, would like to have a rice which are more of soft and stick together.
Yep.
But for Padang, let's say what the rice is more peppery.
Yeah, you look at the rice in India, your basmati rice.
Yeah.
It's completely different from your jasmine rice. Yeah.
Actually, I have a question with regard to the flush profiling and
Yep.
Because you mentioned that for flush profiling that the consumers to group
Yep.
the product based on one attribute.
Oh no, it's actually it's not based on one attribute. It's based on a global sort of how would you group them together. So they can say, oh, this is melting and dark, and I think those are important. So I'm just going to group them together. So it can be multiple things.
Could be multiple.
Yep.
Yeah, because that was my thinking. If we have let's say 5 attributes, should we do it 5 times?
Yeah.
based on each attribute
Yeah.
or just overall?
Well, so there's a difference. If it's partial mapping, you'll give them one attribute, say just report on that. If you're interested in sort of global mapping, they'll group it on anything. But that's exactly also the problem, because people then find it hard to remember what they grouped it on, verbalize that. So that's a problem with mapping.
Okay, because the next question is because this method is rapid, yeah?
Yeah.
Rapid, which means in a short time, and also the consumers not too many. But then, do we require a validation of this rapid method? And if yes, how to validate?
Yeah. So they've done studies on repeatability, and well, those studies show that it is rather repeatable. With rapid method, it's quicker than the whole process of training a panel. So if you take into account that training a panel can take, say 200 hours, then almost any method is a rapid method because it doesn't require that training. So a rapid method can still require consumers to be in the room for 1.5 hours, 90 or 2 hours, right? So in that way, you say, hey, but that's not rapid. But when you consider the 200 hours of training, then it is rapid method.
So maybe like in the one with I familiar with is like in FGD, in a qualitative study, let's say, then we will do repetition until saturation, or we do triangulation. So that would be the mechanism.
Yeah, the only difference is that the difficulty is that it's very difficult to know when you when they can't think of anything else, right? So that's your if it's what do you call that? Lose my English. Yeah. So what CD says, normally you do a method, and then if it's a qualitative method, if there's nothing else that comes to mind, then you stop because it's saturated. So how do you get to the saturation point? It's the same with napping. The difficult thing is that people score it on something, right? And then they score it again, but they can't really remember what they scored how they scored it on the first time. So that's the difficulty. Whereas if you have a structured qualitative research, you've got a moderator who writes it down.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is a difficulty with this method. But you can do it. So you can do it repeatedly, and as a moderator, you can see whether this looks like exactly the same grouping. So we must be close to
When
saturation.
we did a qualitative study, when we did the repetition, we repeat to a different person, different respondents.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's
So
yeah.
if the answers or
The focus groups.
response, would more or less
Yeah.
the same.
Yeah. With focus groups, that is a little bit easier, I think, than with mapping.
So in this case, that actually rapid profiling could be done multiple times.
Yep.
I mean, as a
Yeah,
kind of validation.
Yep.
Multiple times with a different
group. Yep. Yep.
Okay. Any other question?
other representative technology is basically give them the whole, all the products. They don't just group it. That's not the case with CADA. It also means that with CADA, you can't use as many products because it takes too much time. And people getting tired of filling out this list anyway, right? Because as you can see, they really focus on the first couple of terms. Yeah. Thank you for inviting me. Yep.
Okay, is there any question from Zoom, Fadil? Is there any questions from Zoom? Oh, Ms. L.
I will read the question. This is from Neti Yuliana. Which of the RSM methods above is most suitable for sensory analysis of fermented beverage products such as kombucha?
It really, really depends. It really depends on how different the products are from one another. And it really depends on your research question. So if you have kombucha and you are looking at different fermentation processes, right? You've got a slight difference in fermentation process, and it gives you a slight sort of tingling or something that's slightly different. Then none of these rapid methods is going to help you. So then you got to go to the actual, say, spectrum or your QDA. It's far more precise because the differences are so small. But if you look at, say, 10 different kombuchas that you buy in the market, right, that are really different from one another, and you just want to know, okay, so how is the market separated? Then mapping will be a good method because you can visually separate the kombuchas, because it could well be that people, the first thing, the most important thing from kombucha could well be that's the sourness of the kombucha, right? And that's what then in mapping you'll see that all the sour ones will be grouped together. It could also be that it's about the packaging. If you do present it in packaging, right? So okay, everything within in the tall glass or whatever, right? It could be about sweetness. That's an obvious one, right? So, but there need to be a substantial difference between the products. Otherwise, the rapid methodology is not going to work. Does it make sense?
Okay, is there any other question from Zoom? No?
Thanks for monitoring that.
Any other question? Yes.
Oh, you use that one?
Yeah, you have to use mic, so then the.
Oh, you use too much. I use it, like.
So actually, this is not related with the sensorial methods, but rather when you mentioned about the wine and the bushfire in Australia.
Yes.
Can I know what's the difference of sensorial attributes between the wine that used the grapes from bushfire and the one which?
Yes. Yeah, you can certainly ask the question, but I don't know the answer. No, because it's a very specific area. You can look, if you look on Google Scholar, you'll find a number of papers in that area. So I know one of our PhD students, he works on that. So he works for the Australian wine industry, and he basically went out to all the growers to teach them how they can apply sensory methods to identify tainted samples. I don't know exactly what the compound is, but when they do that sort of research and they want to train sensory panels, they add a small amount of that compound to different wines and see when people can pick it up. And then once the panel is trained, then they're going to give wines from different vineyards and say, okay, identify that particular compound in the wine. The other thing that you can do, this is not answering your question, but the other thing you can do chemical analysis. So you can use your gas chromatography to look at which compound is in the wine. You combine that with your sensory panel. You combine it with consumer data, and then you know exactly which compound in which quantity is going to negatively affect your consumers. But I don't know exactly the compound. Look it up. So if you Google Scholar, and you'll find it. It's fascinating research, and it's something that people often don't think about. People think about, the bushfire is terrible, it's shockingly bad, but it impacts something that you didn't even think about. Because of course, the grapes do take flavors from the environment. And that's a lot, that's true for a lot of everything that we grow, basically. Yep. Is that's not answering your question? Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Miss Honey would like to have question?
Hi, Julian. It was a very interesting presentations. We also learned a lot here. I have a questions with regard to the napping process.
Yeah.
So it's not quite often that we learn about napping process. So how does it differ between the napping process and the chata itself? Because you also analyze, describe
Yep.
the smell, the touch,
Yep.
the taste
Yep.
of it. And
Absolutely.
then that's the first question. The second one, this is with regards to the wine. And then how do you calculate between the naive consumers, 10 panelists, and then the 30 products or samples for the experienced one? Do you have any specific calculations? So it's just in general, and then for
Yeah.
all products or
Yeah.
specific products?
Yeah. So just to start with your second question, how many panelists do you need? All these numbers that you see about 40 panelists, it really depends on the product, basically. So the variation in the products and the variation in the consumers, that's what determines it. So if the variation in the product is small, then you, of course, you need more panelists. If the sensory variation in your panelists is large, then you also need more panelists. So it really depends on the two of them. So you look at variation on both sides. So you can't really say, this is the absolute magic number. In sensory science, they often say 50 is a very magic number, right? But statistically, it doesn't hold true. It's just an easy number. So how you calculate is basically with a power calculation. So basically, a power calculation is estimating the variation. It's estimating the difference that you want to be able to detect. And then you basically do, where you do, for example, an ANOVA for statistical analysis, you do a reverse ANOVA for your power calculation. So you're making sure that whenever there is a difference, you will pick it up. So you're going to limit your type 1 and type 2 errors. That's your power calculation. So it depends on how many you use. Your first question, that was about CADA and napping, right? Okay. So in CADA, you're giving the attributes straight up front. So you're giving them 40 different descriptors, right? And that's what they're going to rate it on. The risk with that is that you might miss an attribute that's important to them. And the other one is that people might give a different interpretation to each attribute. So the example with brittleness. So brittleness, crispiness, crunchiness, and these are all different sort of sensory perceptions. Yet if we just call it brittle, people have a different interpretation of that. So that way it's not precise. With napping, you don't give them the attributes, right? You just say, this is a piece of paper, just group them the way you want it. So it's more free profiling method. Yeah, so it's basically free sort of profiling. It gives you that visual map of where products are together. Your CADA doesn't directly give you that. It can give it to you after you've done sort of the calculations, right? But it doesn't give you that instant visual map. So if you're interested in, how similar are particular products similar, I'm going to go to every single supermarket in Jakarta and I'm going to buy different durians or or different other products what we have, right? Now put them all on this piece of paper, and now just group them, right? So if you do it for durian, people might just and they've tasted it, and they might group them first on the color, maybe, right? That could be maybe the first important one. Maybe it's the fatty mouthfeel, right? But they're free to whatever they think is important to them. They're free to group it together. Does that help?
Okay, from this side, any other question? No question? Any other question from Zoom?
Okay.
So this is another question from Zoom. Uh, her name is Elia from one of the margarine and shortening company. The question is, can we use rapid descriptive methods to determine margarine and shortening shelf life? If it's possible, which method that can we use? Thank you.
So shelf life. Margarine. Oh, okay. Yeah. So shelf life of margarine. It's the same sort of applies. For shelf life testing, there's often small differences that appear, and there are it's often on a gradient. So if you look at oxidation, it goes from hard detectable to more detectable. So for that, you probably want to have an intensity measure, right? And you want to know how total flavor profiles are impacted. But it's going to be small. So napping is not going to be suitable for that. Because the products are too similar. So napping wouldn't do it, right? Flash profiling, if the difference is very obvious, it could work. But probably with shelf life testing, you want to have a far more precise method. You probably want to go for like either Spectrum or QDA, just because I think that shelf life is just a very small difference. What you then want to do is you want to combine that with liking data to see where the point of rejection is. Because especially with shelf life testing, there'll be a point where they say, now I just don't want to buy it, right? You want to know where the point is. I'm not saying that you should push it to that point, but at least you need to know where that is. But napping wouldn't be suitable because the differences are too small, and the other rapid methodologies are probably not suitable because the differences are too small. So you got to go to your traditional methods for that. Yep.
Maybe just a limited questions in relation to this. For this rapid method, it would be suitable at which stage of product development?
Yeah. Rapid methodologies can be very good for understanding where the market is at. So let's say you want to develop a new chocolate. You want to know what's out there, and you want to know how they group together. What are the similarities between the different chocolates, and what do people really focus on? And where does your chocolate that you want to develop, where does that sit? So you want to use it. I wouldn't use it as a quality check because you're too late. You want to use it a little bit early in that
So
innovation.
earlier stage.
Earlier stage.
stage
Yep.
or-
Earlier stage. Yep.
At the prototyping, at
Yeah.
the ideation.
Yeah. Ideation,
then
scouting. Yeah. Yeah.
prototyping.
Yeah.
Ah.
Well, most that's where I would mostly use it. Or if you have a product already on the market and you notice that product is not doing well, you want to know where that sits in the market and how people group the different ones. And then you look at, hey, these are grouped together. These are all the very successful products. So what do they have in common? My product is really way out there. So in that way you can use it as well.
So any other question? From Zoom? Okay. Yeah, maybe this is the last question, yeah?
Yeah, it's last question. Yes.
Okay, so this is from Fadila from IPB University.
Oh.
So she did a rapid sensory, which is emotional mapping with Chata method, in the lab as a control and video 360 in the virtual reality in different places, such as beach and park, for a product of mango flavored ready to drink. But the result is not significant for the emotion attributes, which is to use 9 attributes from FGD result with the panelists. But the liking and the experience scores were the highest when using the PR. Do you have any suggestion of it?
I was trying to get the question, sorry.
Yeah. Maybe you want to repeat it.
Okay. Oh no, that's my slide. Oh no, I think I completely agree with that. But that's my own slide. Yeah. So the liking experience scores were the highest using VR. The VR meaning?
Yeah,
Oh, the VR. Oh, okay. Okay, so I'm not sure if I get the question right, but so for virtual reality, so you do Kera not in virtual reality, and you do emotional and liking in virtual reality or something, right? Okay, so so especially for emotions, that is an important one. Emotions are very much given by the environment that you consume it in. The downside of classic sensory methodologies, where you basically take everything out of the context, is that it doesn't have that environment, and it doesn't generate emotions. There's a number of studies that shows that virtual reality is actually a very good way of generating those emotions. The emotions then can lead to liking. So there's a number of studies that found that if you are measuring a food in a real environment or in a virtual environment, that's a better predictor of how you would like it in a real environment compared to when you were measuring it in a lab. So you've got your controlled lab, which is clean, basically no emotions, no environment, versus your, on the way on the other side, your real environment. And the real environment is better in predicting your liking in the real environment, because that's a real environment. But the real environment is difficult to get to. So that's where you try to find something in between, which can be your virtual reality that mimics your real environment. So that's where you can find the difference. So we've done a number of studies with virtual reality. And one of the things that we saw is that if you measure liking in we did a busy street environment and a natural environment. The natural environment was more associated with healthy food choices. And so when we tested things in the natural environment, the desire for healthy food choices went up, right? So that's really dependent on the environment. The studies done by Joanne Hort in New Zealand showing the same thing, that the virtual reality is a pretty good surrogate of a real life environment. One of the reasons that we did that you test in central locations is that it's too expensive to go to people in their house, and it's also not controlled. But now with virtual reality, we can actually control the environment. So again, I'm not sure if that's answering the question.
I think the question is why the results are different from the emotion or the result. The liking is different when it is assessed in a virtual reality
yeah.
versus the reality.
Is it versus the reality or versus a controlled sensory environment? Yeah. 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 That's what I mean. That in a controlled environment, you don't have anything that triggers your emotions. Your emotions impacts your liking. So if you measure it in a real environment or virtual environment, you triggering those emotions, which impact liking, and therefore your liking can be different in a emotion-driven environment compared to your clean environment. It's something that is absolutely true, I think, and it's been verified by a number of different studies.
Okay. I think that's all the last questions. I hope for me myself, I learned a lot today because these are new things. I hope all of you also learn new things and could
By the way,
give you an idea. Oh yeah. Please fill in the evaluation. I do hope with this power talk you will have more ideas, yeah, for later for your EP or for your thesis, or when you work, then you have more ideas. So you have more varied analysis. Because if I read all your EP reports, most of the test is hedonic, hedonic, hedonic.
So if it,
So actually, there are many other methods, yeah, available. Okay, thank you. Big applause to Helium. So, thank you very much. You know, this is our first time to meet again after so many years. he, he was my buddy. Actually, when I came to the Wageningen, he was assigned as my buddy because he has to guard to protect me. I remember we met and then you break me off and another little bit. But
Yeah.
then after that, he disappeared.
yeah.
Just for a few days, then I disappeared. Then I never met him, if I'm not mistaken. Once again, twice. When I think the second time we met again. All right. That's done.
Okay, thank you, Professor Lim and Miss Siti. Once again, please give a round of applause for them. Okay, now, as a token of our appreciation to our speaker today, for Professor Lim, we have a special presentation. I would like to invite Miss Siti again to come forward and present the certificate and the plaque. For the documentation team, please capture this moment. Okay. Okay, once again, please give a big round of applause for Mr. Lim. One more, okay. 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 Thank you, Miss Siti, for presenting the plaque. Thank you, Prof. You may return to your seat. You may return to your seat. Oh, where? Oh, okay. Before we conclude, a quick reminder to all participants to fill in the evaluation survey form to claim your e-certificate. And thank you all for being part of today's session. Let's gather for a photo group. So I would like to invite all the participants here to come forward for a photo group.
Please gather to the center, guys. It's okay, don't be shy.
Closer to the center, please.
Closer.
Okay.
Udah nih, udah.
Everyone's ready?
Everyone ready? Please look at here.
3, 2, 1. Okay, once again. 3, 2, 1. Okay, wait.
Okay, don't be too
Once
stiff,
more,
guys.
once more.
No, it's okay, Miss. I dukung.
3, 2, 1.
Okay. Please bring your best pose, guys. Don't be too stiff and formal. Yeah.
Countdown.
In 3, 2, 1. In 3, 2. Okay.
Okay, thank you, everyone.